You are listening to the Hiking Radio Network, where we talk the walk with shows by hikers, about hikers, for everybody.
Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis. Join Steve and his guests every week as he staggers from Georgia to Maine.
Hi everybody, it's a brand new year, and this show has reached its 200th episode. Yep, Mighty Blue on the Appalachian Trail, the ultimate midlife crisis, is 200 episodes old today. We've had over 800,000 downloads since I started the show back in September 2016, and we continue to grow. This past week, just gone, we had over 7,000 downloads alone. So we're averaging more than 1,000 a day. Yep, I know, simple math. For those of you who have been with me all the way, thank you from the bottom of my heart for encouraging me to continue bringing wonderful stories to you. For those of you who are new to the show, welcome. You can catch up with all the episodes of this and the other Hiking Radio Network shows at hikingradionetwork.com. They're all there and they're all free. As most of you know, we have two other shows starting soon with kind of live hikes of the AT. They'll be coming very soon indeed, in fact. Our other current shows are the Trail Danes podcast and Jester Section Hiker. Once again, everything can be found on the hikingradionetwork.com website. For this special episode, I wanted to bring you somebody special. So my guest today is my dear friend from the class of 2019, Sara Spittel, or Cushy Life. Trigger and I shared quite a bit of Cushy's hike this year, and I'm delighted that she's on the show today. For our hostel this week, I'm talking with Adam Stanley, otherwise known as Stanimal, the owner of two hostels in Glasgow and Waynesboro. Stanimal will be on after Cushy. Finally, Paul Stutzman decides that Connecticut is just the right place to get a bit of comfort and plans a route that is intended to get him into a clean bed for 3 straight nights. Bloody luxury. So let's get on with this 200th show. Here's my friend, Sara Spittel, or Cushy Life. I'm going to introduce you now to one of my best friends on the trail this year. This is Sara Spittel, or Cushy Life. Hey, Cushy, how the hell are you?
Hey, I am so good. It's so weird to call you Mighty Blue, though, because now we're not on the trail. So, Steve,
Yes.
It's so good to talk to you and to see your face. I wish I was there to give you a hug in person, though.
Of course you do. You're a very huggy person.
I am.
So, Cushy Life. Now, and I know obviously the reason why you're called Cushy Life, but would you like to explain how you actually got that name?
Sure. I actually got it on the long trail, which I did in 2017. I had a car with me. I enjoyed going to hotels. I had like lots of changes of outfits, and my entire trunk of my car was filled with food and, 4 pairs of shoes because I wanted to try them all. And I came into not a snowstorm. Here we are in winter in New Hampshire, so I'm thinking snow, but a rainstorm in Vermont. And there were people in a shelter who asked me, how is it that you look so fresh and refreshed and, that we're in this terrible storm? And I said, oh, well, I just came from my car where I got a fresh change of clothes. And they said, well, that must be Cushy. And sure enough, I was like, well, there's my trail name. I own it. And as you know, I owned it on the AT as well.
You absolutely did. And in fact, you know what? It's funny, actually. I think you're a really good example of somebody who embraces certain parts of backpacking. You never particularly liked camping that much, did you? So you were always happy to do the various things you can do on the trail. And I think actually that's a good thing for some people who think, I just could not hike and sleep in the woods all that time. While you did sleep in the woods, there were several times you obviously didn't. And it's very doable, the Appalachian Trail, for that reason, isn't it?
It is. I think that makes the Appalachian Trail really accessible for that reason, because there are so many opportunities to be in town or to do something besides camp. I love hiking. Hiking is where it's at for me. And camping is definitely, secondary. I don't really like being dirty. I don't like having all my gear be dirty. I don't like being soaking wet when it's raining out. There's a part of me that thinks it's wisdom that comes with age, but I think it's just also my personality that I was able to discern what was good for me And
Yeah.
being in the terrible conditions was not something that I thought was good for my longevity on the trail or my ability to be successful. And I think that was part of what I was keeping in mind the whole time is, what do I have to do to be successful at completing the trail? Because that was my goal, not to just go and have an experience on the trail, but to actually complete it. And so I think I kept that in mind a lot when I was making my decisions about what was good for me.
I mean, I think really that's a lesson for everybody to think about, because, there is absolutely no one way to do this the correct way, is there? There's a way to do it that you're happy with and that works for you. You're very sure about that. You always, I mean, every time you would, in fact, you hammocked, didn't you? So you would hammock. You were very, very fast to get started in the morning. You didn't waste any time. And I know you weren't a big fan of the camping, but you always did it. But if you didn't want to do it, you could spend many, many days off the trail. In fact, didn't we meet a woman once, Cushy, who was literally day hiking the Appalachian Trail?
We sure did. She was actually on the board, Fussy Mary. She's on the board of the Appalachian Trail Conservancy. And I have stayed in touch with her since the trail. And she is what she says, she is day hiking the Appalachian Trail. She gets shuttle rides to the beginning of where she's going to hike, and she hikes to her car and she stays at a hotel, and then she repeats and does the same thing the next day. And she's been doing the trail in big sections over a couple of years, but literally as a day hiker. And I just thought that was fabulous.
I know you did. And I obviously know quite a bit about your hike this year, as we spent about, 700 miles together, maybe a bit more. I'm not quite sure.
A lot of time. Yeah. You were a great part of my trip.
Yeah, we had a lot of fun. But I want to know also about the rest of it. When I was with you, you were a very social person. And I don't think we actually passed anybody that you wouldn't have a chat with. You normally like that, or you're just naturally curious about all the other hikers you were passing?
I think I'm a very social person. In the town, we live in a town of 3,200, say, and my husband always introduces himself as Sarah's husband, because people tend to know who I am. So so if that gives you any indication, but I can tend to be very inwardly focused as well. So there is a balance for me. And even though I'm social, I'm not so sure I'm an extrovert. I think that I am very happy to be with people, but I also need a lot of time by myself to recharge.
I noticed that. No, it totally does. And I noticed that. You and I, we talked quite a bit. And I know that you would literally have something to say to everybody in the nicest possible way. Remember what Trigger used to do? He used to start clicking his poles,
his hiking poles. It's so funny.
Which meant we want to move on now. I tell you what, I then traveled. Once we split somewhere around Harper's Ferry, you and I and Trigger. Trigger carried on doing that for the next 1,200 miles. So
that's hysterical.
You got away with some of that, I tell you, because he was always. Clack,
click, click, click.
Yeah. Now, I
never wanted to be rude. Everybody had their own story to tell, and I didn't want to cut them off.
Quite right. And everybody's stories were different. They were fun. And it was just a great way to meet everybody on the trail. And you would always engage people. And interestingly, when I remember we had one of us had to pick up a car, and we split up, and you were going south and we were going north.
Yes.
And Trigger said to me, "How long do you think? When do you think it'll be before we meet them?" I calculated that you would stop every 10 yards, I think, something like that, because you'd be meeting all the north mountains.
And we did. I remember seeing Halo and his group that day, and there were so many people we passed, and it was such a fun day because I got to catch up with everybody.
It was funny, it really was. But now, and I know you mentioned you did the long trail. You've been hiking for some time, but mainly in New Hampshire, haven't you?
Yes, mostly in New Hampshire and Vermont. Never on the West Coast, never further south than New Hampshire. So I only knew New Hampshire mountains. As far as I knew, I'd seen videos and heard about the Appalachian Trail, but as really in my mind's eye, it could have all looked like the White Mountains for all I knew. I had no idea what the rest of the trail would look like. And you can imagine how surprised I was when it wasn't. And I think I'm kind of like a New Hampshire disciple. Like, I would just tell everybody, don't be scared of New Hampshire. It's just so beautiful, and the beauty will take you away. And I was very excited to get back to New Hampshire the entire trip.
You did mention that from time to time. It's got to be said. But we'll come back to New Hampshire in a minute.
You keep me honest. You keep me honest.
So what was it, though, about? And you very much were doing was it the New Hampshire 48, you said? Or
yes. Yep.
They're over 4,000.
Yep, there's 48 4,000-foot mountains in New Hampshire. And then there's also another list of 52 mountains that have beautiful views that aren't necessarily 4,000 feet. And so you do the two of those lists together and there's 100. So
Oh, how
100
nice.
peaks in New Hampshire. Yeah.
Yeah. So what made you want to give up 6 months of your life to do the AT? Because, and we're going to come back to the giving up part of your life, but really, so, what was it about the AT that made you want that challenge?
So I learned about the Appalachian Trail when I was in college. I was on an outward bound program in Maine, and we actually hiked up the top of Mount Katahdin. So that was the first exposure that I had to Appalachian Trail. And then when I was hiking in New England with my daughters, or in New Hampshire with my daughters and husband throughout my daughter's teenage years, and then later would meet through hikers when I was up in the presidentials and some of those peaks. And so was exposed to it again. And just, it's something that kind of sat in the back of my mind, but I was an at-home mom and taking care of my daughters.
Mm-hmm.
And this past year, our youngest was graduating from college, and it just seemed like the right time to do something that was totally self-indulgent and totally about me. And I wanted a challenge, and I love physical things, and it all just seemed to fall together. And for the right reason, because it was the right thing for me to do. It absolutely was the right thing for me to do.
Yeah, well, interestingly, I'm actually going to jump ahead to a question that I had a bit later, but I'm going to mention it now because when we were hiking together, I had a really close-up look at your view of what it's like to be a hiker, worried about the person you've left at home. In your case, it was Rob, who, we met several times, and he was a great guy. He always turned up with beer and food, so you got to love a guy who does that. Yeah, particularly donuts, yeah. And I know that you often felt quite guilty about leaving him without your support at home. That seemed to get worse for you as time went on. How important do you think it is to have that unqualified support from home? Because I know for me, it was very important in the past. So what was it like for you?
It was 100% important. If he gave me the signal at all that he was suffering at home, I would have left the trail. And I think when you and I and Trigger were hiking together in New Hampshire, the first half of New Hampshire, and Rob came to visit, and I could sense that he was very stressed. And I had taken a week off when I was at the New Hampshire-Vermont border and came home for vacation, and I could sense that there was stress. And at that point, all I wanted to do was hurry up my pace and get finished, because I knew that it was time for me to come home. I knew that it was really starting to weigh on him, taking all of the responsibilities that normally both of us would share, and to take care of them all on his own was starting to wear very thin. So I really, at that point, just was putting my head down and kind of powering through.
Because you always said he never gave you any pressure to quit at all. But
No.
when you did finish and you got home, did he say, "Thank God that's over"?
Yes. He sure did. In fact,
and a few other words as well, no doubt.
Not only did he encourage me during the trip, it was one of the things that I had requested is when I have a really hard day, and when I call you, if you could please encourage me to stay on the trail and to not come home. And if I say I want to quit, don't coddle me and tell me you've done well enough. Come on home. I need you to be, tough on me. And he did. I had a very tough time in the trail in Pennsylvania after I split from you all in West Virginia. I had a very tough, rocky section there, and remember calling him from a hotel room, and about halfway through the conversation just started crying and realized what it was that had upset me. And I said, I think I'm done. I think and he said, no, you're not. This is difficult, but let's come up with a solution to make things better for you. So it was great. But, in our honest discussions since the trail, we've had some honest discussions about how it was difficult for him. And I think I don't know if you remember me saying this, but I've said several times on the trail, like I would never do a 6-month trail again, but maybe I would go for a month hiking every year. And sure. I've thought about doing that this coming year. One of the things that was important for me to do while I was on the trail, it came into my mind, was to get my citizenship, my UK citizenship. I have birthright citizenship in Scotland. So I went ahead and did that. And I was thinking I would go hike in Scotland for a month this coming year. And you know what? The more I talked to Rob about it, the more I realized it really is not the right time even to take a month. I just took 6 months. And since I made the decision that I am not going to leave for another month and go do, it has been so much more, I don't know, fulfilling at home, because I think he's not afraid of me like running off and doing another big adventure right away.
Right.
And we have more time together, and he travels a lot for work, and he's got a big season coming up in January, February, March of travel coming up. And I think just realizing that I'm going to be here supporting him is a good feeling, and not that I'm going to, that we're going to be two ships in the night that don't really ever see each other.
That is so interesting because and you actually, and I didn't think you were right originally by saying how selfish this was. You kept referring to it as a selfish decision to go and do something like that. And a lot of people just do this and just go ahead and get it done. And the support of somebody at home really is so important. And we have talked about this on the show before, but saying it from your point of view and then hearing what he said about it, yeah, I can understand it, because he's a big tough guy. It's not as if he's a wimpy man at all. We met him, and yet, it's tough to take on someone else's responsibilities. And we actually met a guy, I don't know whether you met him, who was actually he was a farmer, and his wife was running the farm while he was away.
Wow.
With all their friend farmers were helping out as well. So this is such a thing that when people go on this trip, they do have to think about what they're leaving behind. But if they got that support, man, it makes it so much easier, doesn't it?
It does, but I am very aware of not pushing that boundary.
Of course, I understand that. Yeah,
I've done it this year, and I am so grateful for this amazing transformative experience that it's been, but I don't want to push,
sure. Yeah.
And have everything all the time be about me. I enjoy being part of a relationship and part of this, relationship with him. So I need to honor that as well.
Of course. Now, we didn't meet for some time. I think it was somewhere around Grayson Highlands area. So what were the early states like for you? How did you find it? Because as you say, it's not like New Hampshire, but Georgia is not easy, is it?
No, I actually didn't think the terrain was difficult. I think the hard part was getting my body physically, getting in physical shape for the trail. Sure. As you're on the trail. I had done prep for a year leading up to it, but as people say time and time again, nothing prepares you for being on the trail like being on the trail. So I actually thought that the trail really woke up in difficulty right as we crossed the North Carolina border. And that's where, because North Carolina is the next state after Georgia, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So that first day in North Carolina, I thought was really tricky. And then I think that I thought North Carolina and Tennessee were more difficult than Georgia was. I did not find Georgia all that challenging, but I think I was kind of on a euphoric high also, and had met my first trail family, which Trigger was part of because we met on day 2. My cousin was with me. We just had this great group of a dirty dozen, and I think we were just all, having a great time together. And, I certainly had more like muscular issues and tight IT bands and things like that than the actual terrain itself being difficult.
And you, as you said, you actually introduced me to Trigger. So how did the two of you meet? You said it was the second day, because you don't seem like natural allies, but whoever is on the trail, you just bump into people and you get some sort of synergy, don't you, really?
That was one of the really neat things about the trail. My first trail family, that group of a dirty dozen, I think we were the most unlikely crew. We had a 17-year-old all the way up to Trigger, who was our oldest in that group. And most of them were in their 20s. And I never thought that they would want to hang around with a 51-year-old and a whatever Trigger is. I
66.
Okay, did I say 70? I'm so sorry, Trigger.
No, you didn't.
So I think that the trail makes very unlikely combinations. And I think we get something out of each of those people, whether we think that's what we need or not. We get something from it. But he and I met at a shelter on, I believe it was day 2. We were with this large group of people, and he was feeling down and he was feeling sad. And I, noticed that he was quiet and everybody else was, very outgoing. And I asked him how, where he was planning to go to that night. And he said, home. And I said, you're home? This is day 2. And he said, this is miserable. Yeah. It was raining. He was sore. His leg hurt. And he was miserable. And he said, yeah. And his pack was very heavy at that point too. We hadn't gotten to, is it Neil Gap where the outfitter, where people do a shakedown.
Yes. Yep. Mountain
Mountain
crossing.
crossing.
Yeah.
So we hadn't gotten there yet. So he and I, I kept kind of touching base with him that day, and finally, asked him as we were hiking, so what is it that, why are you hiking, and what made you come out here? And a lot of it had to do with his grandkids. He wanted to show them how strong you could be at any stage of life and when you set your mind to something. So I kind of used that against him for a while. Like, you can't leave, you got to prove this to your grandkids. And it worked.
Yeah.
And he finished the trail, not because of me, but because he was able to tap into his strength and what it was that was motivating him, and keep that motivation in mind.
He needed you at that time. And I think that was a fine example of what the trail can do. The right thing comes along to help you at the right time, doesn't it? You were the right person to come along and help him at that time, and he needs it. And I think for several times I helped him as well. And I think other people on the trail, Dodger helped him as well. Everybody,
all of us did. We all,
you
just, it's like pieces of a puzzle. And I can't believe I just said that, because I've been using the puzzle analogy since I've been home, but I haven't thought about it until I just said that the trail itself, each of us is a piece of the puzzle. The mountains are a piece of the puzzle. Each person out there is a piece of the puzzle. The weather is a piece of the puzzle. And you keep putting these pieces together until the puzzle's complete. And the puzzle gets completed at the top of Katahdin. And then what happens to the puzzle? And I have, I don't mean to skip ahead of where you are in the storytelling, but since I've been home, I have used the analogy of a puzzle a lot. And I feel like I'm a piece of a puzzle that kind of, my edges got sanded down while I was on the trail and buffed and smoothed a little bit. And now I've been dropped back into my puzzle at home, and I don't quite fit in my puzzle piece anymore. My puzzle piece is a little bit loose around the edges. I have a place there, but I'm not quite moving into it just the way that I was beforehand. And so it's interesting to think of the actual trail itself as a puzzle too, that we all had to be there. Each piece had its strength and its importance, and it wasn't a complete puzzle without it.
And I've certainly said I give Trigger a lot of credit for keeping me accountable, because he made I was lazy, but he pushed me on a lot, and he really helped me all the way.
Trigger was always game to go further, go longer, work harder, and he was just such a calm and peaceful presence, and that's something that I didn't realize how much I needed until I didn't have it. And he brought that kind of calm strength with him. So
I agree.
He has a wonderful balancing way about him.
He does. Now, I don't recall precisely where you and I met, but I do remember you being, was it Damascus? Okay, well, I do remember you being.
Damascus. Yep.
Oh, was it?
Yep.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
And we stayed at a campground right out of the first night out of Damascus. And I told you my story about the dog, and you interviewed me for your show.
That's right.
And then, we didn't see each other again until we got into Grayson Highlands, and you stayed at a different shelter than I did. Or no, you went ahead. Trigger and I went up to Mount Roberts, and you decided to go ahead, and we met you that night. And then I think we just kind of
hung around.
I can't remember where we decided. Oh, then it was at not Quarterway Inn, the one before that, Woods Hole. That's when we actually started hiking together. So you interviewed, when we were in Grayson Highlands, you interviewed the really great guitar player, and his name is going to escape me right now.
I remember him though. The young guy who was out there on the trail. He tried the year before, hadn't he?
He was from Florida. Yep.
That's right.
And he played guitar for you, and you and I sat in on that interview and listened, and then you and I talked more. And then by the time we got to Woods Hole, we were so happy to see each other. We hadn't seen each other for a few days. We were always kind of a day off at Quarterway Inn and these different places. You had worn that funny costume at Quarterway Inn, and she told me all about it when I got there. And I was always just like a day off from you. But Woods Hole, I think, is where we started actually hiking together. Yeah,
I think you're right. Actually, because we hiked in from Woods Hole with Julie Gayhart, who's Jester, who's doing
Jester. What a great day that was. That was a great day. You asked me a trivia question about if I was stuck on a deserted island, what was the one album I would have with me? And I thought that was such a great question. I think well, I don't even really remember what my answer was. I'd have to think about that again. But I think it was Alison Krauss. And
It was Alison Krauss. You're absolutely right. It was Alison Krauss. Good Lord. But what I was going to say to you was how unmistakable you were. You know, you had quite longish kind of grey hair in 2 ponytails. And I know that the grey hair held some significance for you, didn't it? Because you told me about it at the time.
It did. You know, I think, I don't know if the same is true for men, but for a lot of women that I have met, we don't like birthdays. We don't like our gray hair. We don't like our wrinkles, all the things that show that we have that aging and wisdom and experience behind us and under us. And my perspective is a little bit different. I have a sister who died of breast cancer when she was in her 50s. And my mother is also a breast cancer survivor, and my other sister. And I think and I have a brother who died when he was in his 30s. And I just realize what a gift it is to age. And the more gracefully I do it, and the more I just accept this body as I do it, I think the better off I and everybody around me is. You know, if I keep fighting everything that's going on, it certainly isn't showing a whole lot of gratitude for the life that I'm living.
That struck me very, very hard, that did, because we all complain about getting older, don't we? And yet, how lucky are we? Certainly me at my age, at 66, to be able to get out and hike that trail. My body was able to get me there. You know, I'm very grateful, and you certainly articulated that in a way I'd never heard it before, and I always thanked you for that in my mind. You know, it was a really important thing to say. Now, I'm sure you're going to remember this, though, because one day we were all chatting in a group, and we asked each other what we each thought our percentage chance of finishing the trail was.
Oh,
do you remember that?
Yeah.
and I think that most of us said, well, wow, we're doing pretty well now, 90, 95%, which was ridiculously optimistic. What happened to you about a day later?
Oh, a day later, I thought I had a stress fracture in my leg. I had shin splints that were so bad that I was sobbing coming off of the trail, and went into whatever little town that was in Virginia, and had x-rays, and I ended up staying off the trail for a week. And it was shin splints. It was... and talked to my orthopedist at home after I had x-rays. And, you know, my physical therapist ended up coming down to Virginia. It just happened that she was coming down at the same time. And she helped me with some therapy and some things to do. And, you know, what I realized, that was still pretty early on in the trip, but I realized I needed better padded shoes. I couldn't let my shoes go.
Right.
Past a certain point. So it was about every 300 miles that I needed to replace my shoes. So when I did not replace my shoes, the shin splints would start kicking in. And as soon as I would start feeling tightness in my legs, I would change out my shoes and it would be gone. It was amazing.
Yeah, I remember that. Yes, from then on, you did literally do a 300 miles and then change out your shoes, didn't you, every time?
Yeah.
And it worked, didn't it? You got there, so it must have worked.
Yeah. I finished the trail. That week off, though, it was a great location because we were at Devil's Backbone Brewery while you all were going through those mountains. But it was a tough week because the murder happened that week also. So it was really great to be together as family or community, that we were a trail family. But that's when all of that was hitting at the same time, right before we entered Shenandoah.
How bad did you feel about being off the trail? And do you wish you'd gone home at that point? Or do you feel that if you'd went home, you wouldn't have returned? Because to be honest with you, I was amazed. I was amazed that you hung around for a week, because I thought I just couldn't bear to be around people who were hiking. But you seemed to stick at it. You had a smile at the end of the day when you picked us up. So how did you get through that?
Well, I think it was my opportunity to do a little trail magic in the midst of my hiking and give back to my community, because I rented a car and, you know, did some slack packing, but also would show up places and give out beverages, and other people were able to use the rental car, and it all just served a purpose. I brought some people to the doctors. I don't know if you remember, Denali had some issues at that point.
I do.
So it was a good time. Q needed to go to the doctors. Boy, I hadn't thought about Q in a little while. That's nice to think of him. But I think it would have been a slippery slope if I had gone home at that point. I think when you go home and you're on a high, that's one thing. But when you go home at a low, home is awfully comfortable. And I did not want to put that temptation in my path at that point. And I'm glad I didn't. I think it was the right move to just stay there and be absorbed in the community.
I don't know how you did it, and I know I couldn't have done it. I would have been so bloody miserable. I think I would have had to have gone away somewhere, because being around people who were having such a good time hiking, you kept a smile on your face, but I could see it must have been wearing thin towards the end. and then it was that thing about us saying, as soon as we said how well we're doing, one of us got injured or something happened to us, didn't it? It's
But
ridiculous.
we all finished it, didn't we?
That's right. Very true. You're absolutely right. Yeah. And the other thing I recall, you were always very supportive of other women on the trail, and women supporting other women became something of a theme for you, certainly in the time that we were together. Can you talk to that a bit?
Yeah, I think it's something that I brought onto the trail was a desire to convey a strength about hiking as a woman, and to be able to do it without necessarily having your husband or your partner with you, that you could, as
Sure.
a solo person, accomplish this. And so I think I just had a soft spot, especially when other women were having a downtime, that they were capable and strong, and that they could do this.
Yeah. Well, it was funny because you then left the trail to attend your daughter's graduation before you
Right.
returned to hike with Christina, Dodger Dog. And Trigger and I felt, oh, she's left us behind. we
Ah,
felt kind of left out. Was it a different feeling on the trail hiking with other people? Because you'd got used to a tramily and you moved on to another tramily, which was obviously great. Was it different for you?
it was different. When I came back from my daughter's graduation, I needed to see what it was like to hike solo. When I came back to Harper's Ferry, I came back and I stayed with some friends that lived in Maryland for a few days. And
Right.
an incident on the trail happened where somebody that I knew had been accused of sexual assault on the trail. And
That's right.
I kept it in and I buried it. And I kind of realized I had stopped talking to people. I was isolating myself. You guys were hinting that you were waiting for me. And I couldn't withdraw into myself enough at that point. And
Right.
that's when I hit my low point and spoke to my husband, and
Sure.
he helped me kind of creatively brainstorm. But until I spoke to him, I didn't tell anybody else about this abuse that I had heard of. And I just kept it all inside until I just imploded and I wanted to come home. And that wasn't the right answer either. The answer was dealing with these emotions that this had, I hate to use the word triggered because we have our friend Trigger, but
Yeah.
these
Yes.
feelings that had been shaken up inside of me and that bubbled to the surface. And at that point, I didn't really want to be around other men. I just wanted like a support of other women around me. And
Sure.
I needed to feel strong in myself. And this all came from an earlier life trauma that I have now realized as a result of that I have come home, and I am now starting to work on that for the first time in my life. I'm working with a therapist on that exact situation and what happened and the fact that I got triggered,
Sure.
and what do I do with it now moving forward in life. And so again, the trail has provided me with something that I didn't even realize it was going to give me. So there you go. So
Yeah. Well,
I walked by myself, but I needed companionship, and that's what I realized after a few weeks being by myself. And then I moved up with Dodger Dog, and we met a whole host of other people, but never really another tight family group until I saw you and Trigger again in New Hampshire for the first part. And then when I got to Maine, I got connected with Shark Tooth and Turd, and I ended up hiking with them all the way
yeah.
to the summit. And so
No,
that
great
was
fun.
another trail. They were so much fun. So that was another trail family that I had, and Mooney was part of that. So yeah, there was a lot of goodness that came out of mixing things up. And I think I needed that time for me and to explore, because I had been with Trigger since day 2, and that had never been my
Yes.
intention going on the trail. I thought I would move in and out of groups and, just kind of do
Yeah.
my own thing. So I
You
feel
can
like,
never really plan it though, can you? Don't you love that part of the
no,
trail?
no,
Can't plan it. It just happens to you. You have to let the trail come to you, don't you? And people will come into your life and go out of your life on the trail because they just do. And that's okay.
yes. Yep,
Yeah.
absolutely.
And I know we met up again, and it was great that, certainly when we were in New Hampshire, I know you were looking forward to it. And this is somewhat of a
Oh,
redundant
no.
question. How much fun was that for you to be in New Hampshire?
Oh, it was so much fun, and it was so much fun to share it with you all. It really was. And to have friends, pick us up and go to their homes. And
That
it
was
was,
awesome.
and to hike on trails that I had been on before, there was such a familiarity and comfort with that made, even though New Hampshire is so physically difficult, it made it almost easy for me because I knew what I was doing, and I knew where I was, and I understood these mountains better than I had understood the mountains before. It was great.
You mentioned earlier on, you'd only really done New Hampshire. You hadn't done Maine before, apart from Katahdin, had you?
I had done Katahdin, and I had, and that was it. No,
Did you enjoy Maine? I mean, I loved Maine again this year. Did you enjoy it this year? Because we had pretty good weather, didn't we?
I did, but I hit another low point when right before the Bigelows and that stretch of area. I can't remember the name of the town that we were in, but I got an ear infection, and I think it was after you got sick, then I got sick, because you were sick coming into.
That's right. In Gorham.
Maine from New Hampshire. And sometime around maybe a few days after you got sick, I got sick as well. And I got a sinus infection, and I got an ear infection, and it was starting to go into my lungs, and I couldn't breathe, and I was just miserable. So that was a little bit of a shakeup for me. But again, I got back on the trail, and I just did it anyways.
Yeah. I mean, you finished about 5 days ahead of us. What was your Katahdin day like? Because it looked pretty decent weather, wasn't it?
It was overcast. We hiked up in clouds, and then got to a certain point, and kind of the clouds blew off. And when we were on the summit, it cleared off, and we could just see beautiful shots. And then it clouded over again. So it had been very rainy the day before we went up, and we didn't really want to go up in the rain. So I guess we were lucky that it cleared off enough for us to be at the summit and not have it being pouring on us. But it wasn't a sunny, beautiful day. It was just cloud cover, and but it was exactly the way it needed to be. It was perfect.
Yeah, and you then had those few gaps to fill in. I think you had Mahoosuc Notch was one, and then the bits you'd missed earlier down south. Did they seem like a bit of an anticlimax, or was it then important for you to get the whole thing done, or were you quite relaxed about it by then?
No, I'm not necessarily a relaxed person, Mighty Blue. You know that. I am very goal oriented. I'm very goal oriented. So even though I had reached Katahdin, my trip was not done. And even when I posted it on social media, I posted it as I have reached the summit of Katahdin, not that I was a through hiker.
Yeah.
And so in September, there's a woman from New Hampshire who's a very well-known hiker, Arlette Lan. Apple Pie is her trail name, and she hiked the Mahoosuc Notch area with me. I had a little tiny bit in Vermont to do. I had a little bit more in Maine to do. I had some to do in Massachusetts. And then I had that week in Virginia that I had missed and I did all of that in September. So September was really all about dotting the I's and crossing the T's for me.
So where did you actually, what was the finished spot where you completed the 2,100 and something miles? Was there any particular place? Was it a town?
Yes, it was Waynesboro. I came into Waynesboro, and that's where I had gotten back on after taking a week off.
Do you feel good? I mean, was that a sigh of relief? Were you glad it was over? Or was it?
Yes.
Oh.
Yeah, it was anticlimactic, because I already feel like I had the peak of it was on top of Katahdin. And, I felt like a through hiker, but I knew in my heart that I wasn't. So I finished all that up, but it was more maintenance than it was, the euphoria. It was really just getting a job done at that point.
And I know that I believe anyway that an important part of your hike, and I apologize for presuming things here, but you and I shared some really great conversations, which went on for hours, didn't they? And I know that you had many, many such conversations with other hikers. Was that a really important part of your hike?
The connections with people, absolutely. And it's one of the things that I have identified post-trail that I so value about relationships and want to maintain is the depth of relationship, not just seeing 6 people during the course of a day and having 10-minute snippets with them, or just grabbing a quick cup of coffee before they've got to run off to their next thing. I have become very selfish and greedy in the sense that I want that depth of relationships that we experienced on the trail with all of my friends. So, I make the opportunity to go for like a 2-hour walk with a girlfriend, or to do something that's really more meaningful, because I realize just how invaluable relationships on the trail go really deep, really fast. And then you are lifelong friends with that person. And it is such a gift.
It's funny, actually. I don't know. And it was only out of love I was saying this. I used to say sometimes to Trigger, Okay, I want to get out of Cushy range because I can sometimes hear you having one of your conversations. I thought, oh, let me move on a bit.
Well, and it must have been terrible for all of you because you'd hear the same things over and over and over again. Like, oh
No,
my
I'm
gosh, it's that
joking.
same story again. But
No,
anyways, you've
that was
indulged
so
me.
funny.
You were good
No,
friends.
you know what? I do think it's the most important thing, and to have a proper conversation with somebody, as opposed to, as you say, just doing 10, 15-minute snippets, literally talking to somebody for 2 hours, 3 hours, and but if nothing else, it makes the time pass beautifully quickly, doesn't it?
It does, and the other gift about that kind of conversation is you can have long periods of no conversation and
Sure.
just be hiking, and
Yep.
then a half hour after silence, another thing will come up and you'll start talking again. And we don't give ourselves that opportunity in
I
day-to-day
agree with you. I
typical
agree.
life.
Yeah.
So that was the relationships were really, really, one of my top 3 important things of being on the trail. Definitely.
And did you learn? You did mention that since you've been back, something came up from the trail that made you
Yep.
want to address it. Since you've been back, did you learn more about yourself while you're out there?
I was in awe of my body, and I have never experienced that before. Again, I don't know if this is a female male thing, but that
Right.
I had never been proud of my body and what it could do before, but the strength that it felt and how it moved me along, and the fact that I could have 25-mile days, and I could just I worked hard, and my body worked so hard. Yeah, that sense of awe and it had nothing to do with my appearance. It had nothing to do with whether I was thin. It had nothing to do with, how good I looked. It was all about how strong it was. And that is, again, it's something I've never experienced in my life before.
Have you been able to keep yourself in shape since you've been back, or has it been difficult? I find it difficult personally. I've put on 30 pounds since I've been back. So,
Have you? No,
have you? But you
it's
did.
a mixed
Women
bag.
don't tend to lose so much weight, do they? They tone up more than anything else.
They tone up more. It's a mixed bag. I certainly cannot exercise 12 hours a day like I was. And we got home and the weather turned and it got very cold, and now it's winter here, and the mountains got snow early. So, having hours and hours of hiking is not a reality, but I have started doing yoga and I'm really enjoying that. And I do go for at least 2 or 3 miles every day, and sometimes 5 or 6 miles in a day of walking. And my dog is thrilled that I'm home and walking. So
have you asked him? Have you asked your dog yet? So he may not give you the answer you want.
that's true. That's true.
Oh dear. Well, the last thing I want to ask you is, and you've sort of answered already, given your absence from home, do you think you'll ever do another long distance hike, or are you pretty much done with the 6-month journeys, unless, of course, your husband goes with you?
Right. I'm definitely done with the 6-month hikes at this stage of my life.
Yeah.
I really would love to go out for a month and do month-long trails. And there certainly are a lot of them, whether it's the Colorado Trail or the John Muir Trail. There are so many, but it just won't be this year.
Well, funnily enough, you mentioned Turd Ferguson. Turd and I are going to do the West Highland Way next year in Scotland.
And Scotland was what I was talking about doing next year.
I know. Yeah.
So
it's only 90. It's only 90 miles, Cushy. It won't be too long.
Well, you could tempt me with a week-long something or other, but let's keep open to it. Let's keep talking about it.
Yeah. Well, look, it's been a joy. It was a joy to spend time with you. We both missed you a lot when we didn't, once we split up in Harper's Ferry, and I'm so glad we got to see you again. And we met Rob, who was a great guy. A man that turns up with donuts cannot be all bad, can he, really? So, thank Rob for bringing the donuts to us every time.
I will.
You
guys were a true highlight of my experience as well. And I couldn't have asked for a greater trail family than you and Trigger. And I'm so grateful that you were part of my experience.
Well, we appreciate that. And hope you have a wonderful Christmas. And I'll catch up with you soon, okay? Especially if you consider going on the West Highland Way next year. All right?
I'll look forward to it. I can't wait to talk to you again.
Take it easy. Bye.
Take care.
Bye. Cushy is a far more complex character than may appear on the surface. Travelling hundreds of miles with somebody in the woods will teach you so much about them. And Cushy and I got involved in some very deep conversations. Despite the times I got myself out of Cushy range, I treasured my time with her this year, as I'm sure did Trigger. She is such an inspirational woman, and I know that her YouTube channel, while she was posting to it, was watched by a lot of people, and women in particular. Before we go on to chat to this week's hostel owner, I wanted to thank those of you who answered my call for support for the network. Even though I put up a link that didn't work in the show notes, many of you either found the donate button on my mightyblueontheat.com podcast page and donated that way, and several of you reached out for my address to send me a check. I am so grateful to you all. For those of you who may still want to support me, the best way to do it is to go to the mightyblueontheat.com podcast page and click on the donate button. If you're on a desktop or a laptop computer, it's right at the side of the podcast on the left-hand side. If you're on a phone or tablet, you can find the donate button by scrolling down a bit. Thanks again for supporting me. Now, in this series of hostels I enjoyed in 2019, shocking title, eh? This week we've got a bloke who owns 2 of them, and I stayed in both, so I clearly enjoyed them. Here's Adam Stanley, or Stanimal. I'm on today with a guy called Adam Stanley. He was a 2004 thru hiker. Hi, Adam. How are you?
Hey, how's it going, man?
Not too bad. Now, the reason people may know you, of course, is that your trail name was Stanimal, and you now have opened 2 hostels. Why? Is the first. Why would you want a hostel in the first place, and why 2?
I always joke that like I'm a glutton for punishment or something.
You think?
But you know what? To be honest with you, I did the thru hike northbound in 2004, and I hiked again northbound, not a thru hike, but like a 700-mile section in 2012. I came through Waynesboro in 2012 for the second time, and I met my wife when I was in town.
Right.
And so she was like a member down at the YMCA, so we just kind of were crossing paths and kind of sparked up a conversation. And anyways, I stayed in Waynesboro for a couple nights. I was down at like the free camping. I had my dog. I was hiking with my dog that year, and I kept on going, and I finished in Duncannon that year.
Right.
And we kept in touch, and she kind of said, "Hey, what do you think about coming back to Waynesboro when you finish the trail?" So I had nothing going on at the time. I was like living in Missouri, and again, not a whole lot going on, and so I came back to Waynesboro and started looking at different ways to earn a living, but also, sure. I mean, I've always wanted to kind of give back to the trail and stay connected to the trail, like in whatever way I could, and I'd always stayed in like as many hostels as I could, just because I love the environment and the camaraderie. And it always seemed like, when you stayed at a hostel, value-wise, it was great. You could go to that hostel, you could get different advice on the trail. Maybe you could do some slack packing. Sure. Maybe that hostel would run you around town or help you with a resupply. Maybe they'd help you get your mail drops out. And so I was like trying to take advantage of the hostels. And so there we went in 2013, and we started this in our basement at our house, and we had some blow up mattresses and like an 8-foot couch or 2. And,
right.
I might've had 50 guests that year.
Wow.
And so, it was funny because some of the folks in town would kind of joke, and they'd say, well, how are you ever going to have a business when you're only open like 3 months? I mean, I think I stayed open for just like the northbound season in 2013. Yeah. And anyways, I mean, as time went on, we added the shuttle service and started adding bunk beds. And finally, after 5 seasons, we kind of outgrew the space in the house. We ended up buying the new place downtown, which is extraordinary. I mean, for us, it's fun to be in that space.
It's a great location as well, isn't it?
Yeah, the location is perfect. I mean, right across the street, there's Hardee's. Behind us, there's an Italian restaurant. There's a Gabbett Steakhouse, which is kind of like a Golden Corral kind of place. Walmart is 2 blocks away. There's Little Caesars right behind us. Yeah. Like 6 different fast foods out the front door.
Everything a hiker really needs, isn't it, really? Just everything.
Yeah. And like when that property became available, like the timing was perfect. The location, like when we started to look at it, we like, wow, this is really going to help the customer. It's going to help us too, because we used to spend a lot of time, running our customers around town for the outfitter and for the post office and for all those things like Walmart that they might need. And of course, I mean, hikers are always hungry, right? So like,
really,
so we'd spend a lot of time, waiting for the customers. And so long story short, we got in the new place downtown. So this will be our 3rd season in the new place. And then we also, of course, like over that span of the first 5 seasons, we bought the place in Glasgow.
Yeah, you're the only person I know who actually actively runs 2 hostels. Why did you open a second one? Because you've got everything, as you say, you've got everything in the Waynesboro place, haven't you? So why have a second one?
What kind of happened is, I mean, we're going on 8 seasons. This will be the 8th season for us, and so, you know, I mean, I used to do everything from start to finish. I mean, I'd pick up the guest at the trailhead. I would bring them in. I would do the tour. You know, I would be the one doing the laundry and making the beds and taking out the trash. I would do all the shuttles. I would do all the run around town. And as kind of time went on, I just started adding more and more help as needed.
Sure.
But, you know, I mean, I used to spend a lot of time with my guests. I mean, I still do, but I used to be like the person who was in front of the guest constantly. And so I think, honestly, the best ideas for the hostels have come from hikers. I mean, just spending time with you guys. I'm
sure.
And so, like, so many people would come through Waynesboro and they would say, you know, why don't you do something in Glasgow? There's like nothing in Glasgow. It's like really hard to get a hitch into town. You know, you do the pickup and the drop off. Why don't you provide that service so we can get into town? And then it was like, there used to be a hostel in Buena Vista. And so when that went away, you know, that meant that Glasgow didn't have a whole lot in the way of hostels, and Buena Vista had nothing. So it was just a long stretch, like a big void in the trail.
Sure.
And so kind of one thing led to another, and there was a piece of, you know, commercial property like right on the main drag in town, and it was a home, but it was zoned commercial. I think at one point it may have been a salon or a barber shop or something.
It's got a lovely vibe to it, that one as well. Both of them have got a really lovely vibe to it. I think I think that's one of the things that I noticed about both of them, how relaxed they both were whenever you went in there.
You know, it's great to hear that, because that's what I love about both places. They feel like home, right? They don't feel like you're staying in a motel room. You know, they have green area around, big front yards and backyards. You can dry your gear. But, you know, you feel like you're at grandma's house.
Funny enough, since you say that, I was looking at Guthook's reviews on the Waynesboro site. It says super chill atmosphere that feels like you're spending the weekend at grandma's place, which is awesome. Yeah. What a great review that is.
Yeah. No, I mean, reviews are important to us. And so, yeah, absolutely. No, it's been fun. And, you know, it gives us an opportunity to continue to try to give back to the trail. I mean, the reality of the hostel business and the shuttle service is that you're never going to get rich doing it. I mean, it's not. And if you're in it for the money, then you're probably going to be disappointed.
Sure.
But I mean, we're up at 5, 6 o'clock in the morning, and we go to, you know, we finish the day a lot of times at 10 o'clock at night.
I'm sure.
And they're long days, you know, but I think that, like, what it comes down to is, at least for us, is like hikers helping hikers.
Yeah.
And hopefully at the end of the day, like, you know, like this time of year, we start to get a lot of the finishing photos, and we can start to get a lot of feedback. You know, when people send pictures from Katahdin, and that's like, that really makes you feel like you've done something positive. You contribute.
Giving somewhere some comfort and some place to buy their food, and I think everything about the place just kind of works. And I think with these places, some of them are set up with the best of intentions, with no real idea of what it takes to be a comfortable place, and you provide a comfortable place in both. I remember there was, I can't remember where I was. I think it was in Glasgow. Was this huge massage chair. Was it in Glasgow one, or was it both of them? Yeah, it was awesome.
Both of them.
Oh, right. I didn't realize you had one of the other one as well. But yes, that was lovely. And I remember also that there was a lady called Donna was in charge at the Glasgow site, I think it was. Do you have a large staff changeover, or are these ex-hikers? I mean, how does that work out, getting people to work for you?
You know, honestly, I try to. I mean, the goal is to keep people around as long as you can, because you know, the longer the staff is there, the more experience they have, and the better they are at helping you guys.
Cool.
Donna's been with me, I think, going on 3 or 4 seasons. Glenn, he's going on, I think, 3 seasons in Waynesboro.
Right.
So, I mean, in the past, I mean, usually a caretaker would stay, you know, a year, you know, up for a season. That, you know, and of course we pull in a lot of work first days, and you know, I'll get, you know, during the season, hikers get injured, or they stop hiking, they want to stay for a month or 2, and then they end up kind of helping out. So that tends to work good.
So are you actually seasonal though, or are you still just coaching for hikers, or are you all year round now?
At this point, the Waynesboro location is open year round.
Right.
We don't close in Waynesboro. Glasgow this year, I decided to close. Like I lost a caretaker like at the beginning of December, so I closed like middle of December, January, February. I'll probably open again in March.
Right.
But Waynesboro, I get a lot of activity, from just other travelers or people that have stayed in the past. I mean, there's 30,000 people in Waynesboro, so it's like more of a metropolitan area. We do. I have my offices down there in Waynesboro. So,
yeah.
What we did over the last month, we added a new guest room in Waynesboro, and we redid the whole basement. It's all finished, framed out, new flooring. We added a bathroom in the basement now in Waynesboro, and then the bathroom on the first floor off the main bunk room, we just completely gutted. New floor, new vanity toilet, new shower. It's beautiful.
Nice.
So we spent a lot of time trying to. I mean, that's something that's kind of fun too. It's like rather than just kind of squirrel things away. It's like I try to invest back in the business. So it's like.
Sure.
I think the experience gets better.
You haven't got plans for opening any more, have you?
No. I don't think there's going to be any more.
Yeah, you've done it too then. Okay. So one thing you're not uniquely, but I'm sure you have a great view of hikers because you see so many of them coming through, and you hiked 15 years ago. Have hikers changed much since you did the trail 15 years ago? Do you notice changes?
I don't think the hikers changed. I think, I should say it. The hikers more well versed on the trail, like with all the internet and how easy it is to get information. The hikers are much better prepared, I think, initially, and then also as far as like like in 2004, it's like you just kind of had to like stumble your way up the trail. We didn't have.
I did that this year as well. I stumbled my way all the way this year.
But I think the trail has changed a lot. Obviously, like cell phones and technology has really changed the trail. I mean, people, they come to town, they download different stuff, or they might be like laying in their tent, at a shelter, and they're watching Netflix or watching like Game of Thrones on their phone, and like you could be like in a shelter, and you could order something on Amazon 2 days, and like you could have that item in town 2 days later. So I think that's the technology, cell phones, there's a lot of hikers do, like, if you're at a point where you could easily be picked up, you call a shuttle. I mean, there's so many more shuttle services. If a hiker wants a cheeseburger, they want to be off the trail for half a day, they can do that pretty easily.
Yeah, it's amazing, actually. And one of the things I noticed, the difference between my 2014 and my 2019 hikes was the access of technology and how many people use them in the shelters, which is kind of sad in some ways because the first thing people would check was whether they had service or not, which I understand. But at the same time, it did slow down the conversation a little bit. So how should people get in contact with you if they want to stay with you next year?
So the best way is my phone number. They can find my number on Guthook or in the AT guide.
Okay.
I'm easily reachable, so call or text is fine. Email.
Okay.
My email is published in both of those places as well.
Right. Okay, good. So they're on the guides, and that's the way to do it, obviously.
Yeah, those are the best ways. I mean, we have a Facebook page. Facebook Messenger is good for us as well. So
okay.
We do same thing. We do the pickup and the drop off from the trailhead. So
yes, you're absolutely right. Once you get across the James River Bridge, is pretty difficult otherwise, isn't it? So to get a ride into town is really helpful.
Yeah. So for Glasgow, there's no service at the footbridge, so you call from the ridge about 5 miles from the bridge. So if they can get a call out or a text from there, call the number that's in the guide or in Guthook.
Okay, man.
And then in Waynesboro, when you get to Rockfish Gap, there's great service, so they can call. I mean, they can essentially, if they want, just wait till they get to Rockfish Gap, and they can call us. And it takes us about 15 minutes to get up there.
Cool. Well, look, thanks very much, firstly, for providing the service, and being such a great host to me this year. You were very helpful in moving some of my gear around, and I really appreciate those little touches. So, but thanks for coming on the show and talking about your hostel.
Yeah, happy to do it, man. It's good talking to you.
Okay, take it easy. Bye.
Take it easy.
After I finished recording Adam, we carried on chatting, and he reminded me that he had been the one who was facilitating my meetup with my friends from 2014, T-Bird and Lighterknot. He received calls from either my ex-wife or T-Bird to let them know when and where I was going to be. That gave me the biggest shock of my journey, maybe even my life. It was awesome. Thanks, Stanimal. Oh, by the way, I've included his contact details in the show notes just in case some of you don't have a guidebook. He gave me permission, by the way. Finally, to bring the 200th episode to a close, we've got Paul Stutzman seeking comfort along the trail. Believe you me, in 2,000 miles on the AT, you're going to be looking for a bit of comfort from time to time as well. I'll see you next week. Chapter 19. Kindness and Courage. On June the 27th, another hot and muggy day, we entered Connecticut. 10 miles ahead was the town of Kent. We needed a break, so we called ahead to book a room. No price would be too great for a shower. I was wrong. $120 did seem too much to pay for a shower. Kent was an upscale town, a playground for rich folks from New York City. Antique shops, B&Bs, expensive chocolate stores and other attractions made Kent inviting, but too pricey for hikers interested only in a shower and rest. Garmin called the owner of Backcountry Outfitters to inquire about getting a ride to nearby Wingdale in hopes of finding a cheaper room. The owner agreed to pick us up at the road crossing, take us to our motel and pick us up again in the morning to return to Kent, where we all had scheduled food drops. Fargo, who thoroughly enjoyed staying in shelters, would stay behind in the woods. We came to the road crossing where we would meet our ride, and a BMW convertible was waiting for us. The ride was exhilarating and the motel was indeed cheaper, only $60 for our shower. What we had not considered, though, was the price of the gas. The next morning, when our BMW taxi dropped us off in Kent, we paid another $60 for the ride. Our shower had cost us $120 after all. I walked the streets of Kent, admiring antique stores and art galleries. Garmin was meeting a former school friend at a road crossing several miles up the trail, so he was already gone by the time I stuck out my thumb for a ride back to the trail. As I rode back to the trail in a beat-up Volvo, I spotted a floppy hat and a flute, and I knew that Padre would probably be catching up with me soon. 7 miles later, I found Fargo relaxing at the Stewart Hollow Brook lean-to. I convinced him break time was over, and he joined me again. I wanted to keep on schedule for my Connecticut plan. The truth was, I longed for more comforts. I would probably be in Connecticut for 3 nights, and if all went according to plan, I would spend all 3 nights in a soft bed. I'd had my fill of shelters and stealth camping for now. We followed the Housatonic River for several miles. The path was level, with the best trail conditions we had seen in days. A familiar figure was walking toward us, headed south. We greeted him. "Hey, Garmin, enjoying your trip back to Georgia?" His internal compass had failed him again, and we turned him around and headed him north to meet his friend. My plan was working to perfection. The second night I had a soft bed in Cornwall Bridge and a great 6 o'clock breakfast at Baird's General Store. The third leg of Connecticut took me 21.6 miles to Salisbury. From the top of Prospect Mountain, I called Maria McCabe. Maria was an 80-year-old lady in Salisbury who opened her home to through hikers. I made my call in the evening and interrupted Maria's card game with her brother-in-law. "Hey, Maria, there's 2 good-looking middle-aged men wanting to stay at your house tonight. How does that suit you?" "I'm taking quarters from my brother-in-law right now, and he's still got a few left that I want," she replied. "But if you're at Lower Cobble Road at 7 o'clock, we'll pick you up." As we approached Lower Cobble Road later that evening, an elderly lady appeared at the trailhead and yelled up to us, "Where are those good-looking men I was promised?" "Just wait till we get showered and into fresh clothes. You'll be impressed." Going to Maria McCabe's was like going to grandmother's house. She welcomed us as if we were family. We learned she had outlived 2 husbands and several boyfriends and took in hikers to supplement a social security income. I'm not certain how much the hiker boarding helped her budget, since she didn't charge much and allowed us to raid her refrigerator. I believe she thrived instead on the hiker conversation. She brought out a notebook where guests had written notes of thanks for her hospitality. In the cold of winter, she told us, when she was lonely or sad, she would take out this hiker journal and read all of the nice things people had said about her. As we retired, Maria told us that she never moved any body parts before 8 in the morning, but we were welcome to cook our own breakfast. Fargo and I were in the kitchen by 6, and I cooked eggs and bacon for us both. Before we left the McCabe house, we wrote nice things in the journal for Maria to read on some dark and cold winter day. We navigated our way out of Salisbury, following directions Maria had given us the night before. The early morning was already hot and muggy, and we were sweating long before we started our last Connecticut climb, Bear Mountain. Back in 1885, a local man was convinced that the highest point in the state was atop Bear Mountain, so he hired a mason to construct a tower on the summit that would be visible to the surrounding countryside. Somehow the mason managed to haul 350 tons of rock to the mountaintop and designed a rock pile in the shape of a pyramid without using any mortar whatsoever. Turns out the mountain wasn't the highest point in Connecticut after all, even though a plaque embedded in the rock still makes the claim. The pyramid eventually collapsed, and although several attempts were made to rebuild it, maintenance became too troublesome over time. The pile was stabilised and the plaque inserted into the side of the rubble. Fargo suggested I scamper to the top and have my picture taken on this so-called highest point. The view was splendid. To the south lay the Berkshire Mountains, to the west the Catskill Mountains, to the east the Housatonic Valley unfolded, and to the north Mount Greylock boasted its summit as the highest point in Massachusetts. All along my journey I was intrigued by the importance folks put on the highest point in any state. The only state that bragged on its low point was New York, where I'd walked through the zoo. A mile later we were in beautiful Sages Ravine. The trail followed a brook whose waters cascaded over rocks and gathered in lovely, inviting pools. Large trees sheltered us as the scenic stretch of trail led out of Connecticut and into Massachusetts. On one tree, a sign fastened above a white blaze welcomed us to my 11th state. Just a few days earlier, entering Connecticut had given me a psychological lift. I was finally in New England. The southern states were done, the middle states were finished. I had just to finish these New England states, and then I could go home. Our destination for that day was a rustic New England inn in South Egremont, 12 miles ahead. The inn offered a hiker's discount during the week if rooms were available. We would be celebrating that day. We expected to pass the 1,500-mile mark that afternoon, and tomorrow was Fargo's 57th birthday. Before the celebrations, we had to conquer Mount Everett. Its summit was covered with blueberries, and we bounded left and right off the trail, eating the delicious morsels. But the descent from Everett was tricky. The trail was slick, the rocks were slippery, and sitting and sliding was often the best way down. At breakfast in town the next day, we talked with a paramedic who told us they had been called out to Mount Everett many times to rescue fallen hikers. Once I had skidded to the bottom of Everett, I passed the 1,500-mile mark of my hike. We had made it down the mountain with no serious mishaps, and we hitched a ride into South Egremont. The Egremont Inn has welcomed guests for over 225 years and was built first as a tavern in 1780. 6 years later, the final battle of Shays' Rebellion was fought and lost only 1 mile from the tavern. The rebellion was led by a group of farmers angry at high taxes imposed by the state. In many cases, the state confiscated properties of those unable to pay. The farmers rebelled and, in effective protests, shut down local courts, prohibiting judges from enforcing the debt collections. In return, the government assembled a 4,000-man militia to show the farmers who was in charge. At the battle near South Egremont, 4 farmers were killed and the rest fled north. Shays' Rebellion was over. During the Revolutionary and Civil Wars, the South Egremont Inn was used as a hospital. In different times in its history, it also housed a store, a school, a post office, a temperance house, and a hotel. Today, it is a charming 20-room inn. History creaked from the long flights of wooden steps leading to my hot shower and soft bed. I was in danger of becoming soft myself. My hike was turning into a town-to-town trek. I found myself scheduling my days around towns, not shelters. Something was changing. I acknowledged that it wasn't the soft beds that lured me into town. I could sleep just as well on a hard shelter floor or on the ground in the forest. I came to town for the people. I craved interaction with more folks than just my few fellow hikers. Leaving town after breakfast at Mum's Country Club, we passed the field where a tilting stone obelisk marked the Battle of Shays' Rebellion. The farmers' last stand against the government had taken place here. Where are those brave farmers today when we need them? There are so few people still willing to take a stand against injustice. The next 2 Massachusetts days were filled with river fordings, railroad crossings, and bog bridges across marshy lowlands. At mile 1537, the trail crossed I-90 over an enclosed footbridge. The traffic whizzed beneath us as we walked over the Massachusetts Turnpike. 6 weeks later, I would be rushing through here at 70 miles an hour, but today I was still travelling between 2 and 3 miles an hour. Our goal was to be in Dalton, Massachusetts for 4th of July weekend. For several weeks, the trail grapevine had been telling us about the Birdcage Hostel in Dalton. It was not listed in our guidebook, but our curiosity was roused and we hoped to celebrate the holiday there. Early one morning I set forth from the shelter by myself. Fargo would get a later start, but I was on a mission. I left the trail when it crossed Pittsfield Road. Just a short way down this road lived a lady I wished to meet, the famous Cookie Lady. Marilyn and her husband run a small blueberry farm. Hikers have been stopping here for many years, enjoying our home-baked cookies. No one was stirring in the shingled house when I arrived. I walked around the yard, admired potted plants, and dawdled on the front porch, signing a noteboard on the wall and making no attempt at quiet, hoping the household would soon wake up. Rufus finally realized a visitor had arrived, and he barked Marilyn awake. The 2 chocolate chip cookies were good, but far more satisfying was my conversation with Marilyn Wiley, a real trail angel. I had woken her for 2 cookies, but the hospitality and warmth she gave in return brightened my day. Sometimes it takes only a few kind words to transform someone's day. How can we be too busy to tell people we most cherish what they mean to us? I remembered Maria McCabe's notebook, where total strangers had written nice things that warmed her in lonely times. Maria McCabe knew the secret. Seeds of kindness sown into others' lives can return and encourage us in our own winters of loneliness. Vargo was just arriving at the Pittsfield Road crossing as I came back to the trail after my chocolate chip detour. I kindly described for him the cookies I had eaten. Shortly after noon, we followed the AT into Dalton. At first glance, the small town seems quintessential Americana, but it's a real money town, built on money, by money, for money. Dalton's largest employer is Crane & Company, producing all the paper used for Federal Reserve notes in America. Every piece of paper money in your wallet right now came from Dalton, Massachusetts. But it wasn't the money made here that warmed my spirits. What made my stay in Dalton a favourite memory was something of real value: families. Front porches and lawns were filled with family activities on this holiday weekend. We'd found the birdcage hostel, marked not by a sign but by a birdcage on the lawn, and my own hiker family was gathering there. Fargo, Padre, Rhino and Runya, myself and others celebrated the 4th in Dalton. Another hostel in town invited the birdcage guests to a hiker feed, and we sat down to corn on the cob, baked beans and an all-American picnic. In this town that produces the money that often brings out the worst in people, I saw and felt what life is truly about: families, togetherness, unity, acceptance, respect and love for God. Those ingredients build strong spines and foster the courage to do what's right in any situation. That's something all the money in Dalton can never buy.